Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Weatherspoon, pastor here at Epworth United Methodist Church, and we are so grateful that we can share our residence with Ashby Village. And so just on behalf of our congregation and our community, we welcome you here to this wonderful presentation.
Okay, bravo. Thank you for being here. We've been looking forward to today and today's presentation. We're very pleased to welcome Sandy Butler and Nan Gefen back with us. Sandy describes herself as a Jewish lesbian, activist, feminist, mother of 2 daughters. Is this good sound-wise? You can all hear? And Sandy is also the author of 6 books. She's written about violence against women and about how death abbreviated the life of a lesbian couple. Her latest 3 books chronicle her life in her late 80s. They're filled with humor, inspiration, and brave choices. So she is here today to talk about her latest book. The title is Now What? Now What shares the daily realities, both joyful and challenging, of life in old age. We welcome Nan Gefen back. Sandy and Nan co-authored their book, It Never Ends. The book details the continuing challenges of mothering their fully grown children. In addition to being an author, Nan is a teacher and a mentor. She's also a supporting member of the Ashby Village since its formation. At the end of the presentation, Sandy will be available to answer questions. The questions that you've written on cards that were provided. Volunteers will pick up those questions and give them to Sandy. Signed copies of Now What will be available for sale in the lobby. Please wait to hear from our executive director at Ashby Village, Bab Freiberg, at the end of our presentation. Many thanks for the many volunteers and staff that help us create these events. So without further ado, we welcome Sandy and Nan.
Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. So many familiar faces. I live in Berkeley, so I see some of you often. Sandy lives in Tucson, so she gets to see you this time around, which is really, I'll speak for you, wonderful for her. Yay. I'm glad to have her here. We're really glad. So, am I okay as far as sound goes? Louder. I need more sound. So, okay. How is that? I'll just keep saying how. Sandy and I have known each other for over 40 years. Yes, over 40. And we have gone through many, what can I say, incarnations of our deep, deep friendship. And we're always discovering new things about each other, even now after all of these years. My role here today is to be the interviewer, so I will be asking her a few questions and joining you in listening to her. That said, let's begin.
Well, before we begin, the thought that hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. You could be demonstrating, but instead you're here, so thank you. The thing I just wanted to say before we started is that when Nan and I were writing It Never Ends, one of my daughters was beginning a public life. And one of the pieces of advice I gave her was never go up to the microphone, tap it 3 times and say, "Can you hear me?" as a way of beginning. However, I feel chastened now because we have to do that, because there are 2 appliances here, there's one around my neck. we need to know we can be heard. So you can all hear us, okay? Okay. Now we can, Philip Roth's an analyst said, now we can begin. Okay. I'll stop.
So, in Irene's introduction to Sandy, she mentioned the many books that Sandy has written, and we could also talk about the organization she's been involved with and the other things she's done too. A person throughout your years, I will speak to you directly rather than just talk about you, who have had so many interests. And when you are interested in something, you go very deep into it, and you care a lot. You have been concerned, fascinated by oldness and the whole thing of what it is to grow old in our culture and other cultures, but mostly in this culture. And a passing fancy, it's very, very deep within you.
Yeah. Okay. Oldness, she began. So I remember in the late 1960s, 1970, when the word Ms. exploded into the world, and everybody lost their, not us, but everybody lost their minds that we would take naming into ourselves about our location separate from which man we belong to, father or husband. The word Ms. did not appear in the New York Times until 1986. So that was the world in which the very idea of us naming ourselves, finding language that reflected who we were and how we wanted to be known, that's where it began for me. Then there was a language that began to develop that I noticed in my 70s, that there was an avoidance of the word old. People were older, they were senior, they were mature, they were a whole bunch of things, but nobody was old. There was something, to use fashion 1970s language for it, had to internalize what the dominant culture thought about oldness and denied it in ourselves, and we would not name ourselves as old. And after having lived all those intervening years, I thought, this is something that needs to be said. That's what I've done in the books I've written and in the life that I've led. What is it that's not supposed to be said? Let me say it. Let me write a book about it. Let me give a talk about it. So oldness was going to be something that I was going to talk about at the beginning. And of course, it comes from my very foundational identity as a feminist. Once I understood the structure of women's lives as one of the foundational ways of understanding what we have access to, what we don't, what power is, how it works, in those early ways of the 1970s, and then over the decades in a more sophisticated, as we say now, intersectional way. But feminism is one of the fundamental lenses through which I see everything. It's alive in me all the time. I'll just digress. I was promising myself I wouldn't, but I will just digress. Way back in the day, modern times, San Francisco, Marxist-Leninist bookstore, there were no women, stapled articles. And there was an article by a woman whose name I've lost, but it was called The Politics of Touch, in which she explained that people touch people with less power. People with less power never touch, put their arm around, pat people with more power. That was so explosive to me, the very idea that everything, even touch, is political. And that was one of the most foundational experiences that I had, and it's still, that every moment in every interaction with another person, there is power relations at play, always. So that's another reason I wanted to bring my thinking about feminism, the structure of women's lives, what we've taken in that we really could rid ourselves of. And then there was another part of it that was more about just me. And when I wrote Conspiracy of Silence in 1978, and then I wrote Cancer in Two Voices, and then Nan and I wrote Never Ends Mothering Adult Daughters, and then I spent almost a decade organizing and writing about the issues of Israel-Palestine, which remain the same but worse. My intention was to be a voice, to amplify, to bring attention to things that I felt were not getting the kind of attention they needed. In the very beginning, believe women when they tell you was a fairly radical thing to say. And when my partner died, she was one of the first to die of breast cancer, and we were both very clear as we were writing the book we wrote together that we were writing it as an offering to other couples, as a witness. And then Nan and I, in all of our conversations, both privately and in our women's group, about our kids aging and how we were aging and they were aging, and the dynamics of how we mothered and how they daughtered, and where power was and where authority was shifting, was something that people weren't really talking about. So we decided, well, we'll talk about it. So that was that book. But then, somewhere when I was about, I don't know, my late 70s, I don't even remember why I wrote it. I was fooling around, and I wrote a piece about thinking about dating, which is in the first book of these three, The Kitchen is Closed. That piece is in there. And I just was having fun with it. I wasn't thinking about being a voice for an issue or that the fundamental earnestness that is me. I am fundamentally an earnest human being. None of that emerged in this piece. And I showed it to Dan, and she said, "Oh, that sounds just like you," which was really different than wanting to be a voice for other people. And it wasn't very fast. It didn't happen from that one piece, but that was the beginning. And Ann said, "You need to send it to Persimetry." And for those of you who may not know about persimetry.org, Persimetry is an online magazine for the writing of women over 60 that Nan, among many things that she's begun in her life, was one of the things she began in her life. So I sent it to Persimetry, but there was something so fun about writing about me. And it took me a little while to feel like I wasn't being irresponsible and I wasn't paying attention to the important political things that I was should be paying attention to, and to understand that being what I began to do when I hit 80.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and I saw all of this unfolding. And, so not only did you be interested and concerned, and lots of conversations, as I'm sure that most of you have had, or have in a regular way with people you know, about what it's like to be an older, what it's like to reach oldness and the thoughts and the feelings about it. So, yes, there you were, kind of embraced by the subject. So for maybe one person, they would write one book, but you wrote 3 books on this. And these books have been written quite recently, and in quite a burst of creativity at this point in your life. And I do want to just underscore that Sandy's writing up until the time she started writing these books on oldness and her own personal experience were just very serious and excellent in their own ways. But the woman is really funny in these books. And some of you are nodding your heads, you've seen them. And so it was like this person just came out. What a sense of humor. And it's just a real kick. And so for me, it's been a pleasure that your oldness book ended up being 3 books, and that your voice is just right through those books. So can you say something more about that?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't intending to write 3 books, and when I wrote The Kitchen is Closed, it's kind of a buoyant book. Here I go into my 80s. It's going to be like my 70s, but it'll be my 80s. And I was traveling, and I wasn't looking down when I walked yet. I was walking straight ahead. You all know what I mean. And when I finished the first book, it didn't occur to me that there would be more. I thought that was a fun book to write. It was a voice I hadn't played around with. Women were very appreciative to receive it. And then when I was 83, I went into a very, very disruptive period, very demanding. There was death, there was illness, there was moving, there was starting again. I was a mess, it was a mess. But in addition to me being a mess and it being a mess, it was also a generic reality. Women needing to be near families, or women needing to downsize, or women needing to move into residential facilities. That was something that women in their 70s were beginning to consider and think about and talk about. And I fearfully and impulsively catapulted myself into a residential facility to be near my kids as a way of, this was the story I made up to tell myself, so I wouldn't be a burden on them, which was easier than saying to myself I was scared and I needed them, because I wasn't quite ready in myself to go that far. It still felt too vulnerable. So instead I was being a good mother rather than a scared old woman. That took some time for that transition to happen for me to be able to tell myself the truth about that. And I was in that residential facility for an oddly coincidental 9 months, and I'm not going anywhere with that, but there it is. And at the end of the book, I moved to Tucson, where this book begins. But I think part of that book was much more emotionally revealing of what it was to be me, what it was to feel scared, what it was to realize I had made a mistake, what it was to feel ashamed, what it was to not want my kids to know that I had made a mistake and felt ashamed, so I made it like everything was okay. Having left behind a rich life of almost 50 years in the Bay Area because I was scared, not understanding the velocity of the fear. It just literally catapulted me out of town. It was like confronting a dimension of myself that I was unfamiliar with. I mean, I would have described myself all my life as a pretty tough cookie. And suddenly I was learning parts of myself that, of course, had always been there, but they hadn't surfaced enough that I had to pay attention to them. I could duck them or make up some other self-protective story about them, so I didn't have to know when I was scared, when I was vulnerable. But there it was. And writing about being in an environment where people don't choose, at least in the one I was in. That's not true now when I talk about my current life in Tucson, but in Phoenix, the population of the residential facility I was living in, everybody was there because they couldn't climb the stairs. They forgot the wrong things and remembered the right. They forgot the right things and remembered the wrong things. They forgot their children's names. The snow was too hard. The summers were too hot. I mean, there was a reason that they could not remain in the lives they were in. And they were going to make the best of what this was. And everything was pretty much in the present tense. They were going to take this chunk of time they had and make it work. Which was an environment that was completely psychologically unfamiliar to me. And I had to find my way to be myself in that environment. So that was the second book about another dimension of oldness. This third book, I'm closer now to 90, and I'm closer now to the end of things. The questions that I have about myself and my life are different than they were at 80 or 81. So I'll read you just a little tiny piece from the introduction to whet your appetites. 7 years ago, I squared my spindly shoulders and entered my 80s. I was sure I knew what to expect, given that I had lived through my 70s. But I quickly realized I had almost no idea what this decade would require of me. In a discomforting echo of how my 60s didn't prepare me for the complexities of my 70s, I soon found myself in unfamiliar and increasingly demanding terrain. I was still me, of course, and relievedly most of the time that came in handy. But what used to be the case was becoming irrelevant, immaterial, and often entirely beside the point. I did what I've always done when trying to make sense of something I don't yet understand. I write about it. The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Being Old was my discovery and exploration of what being old means and what it represented for me. I wrote about the limitations of aging bodies, the freedom to release all the responsibilities that shaped the earlier decades of my life, the tender foolishness of worrying that my car keys may be in the freezer. They never are. The proper nouns that continue to disappear. The freedom to no longer care about the things that once mattered so desperately. Will they like me? Will I be chosen? Did I do a good job? Am I wearing the right top? All of it's gone. The pleasures of our own company. The truth about us. Funny, bawdy, vulnerable, fearful, ridiculous. That's where my pedicures come in. Kitchen was an invaluable record illuminating those early beginnings of my 80s. The second book, Leaving Home, was my account of a massive rupture, the story of my impulsive and fearful self-exile from my community and 50-year life in the San Francisco Bay Area. Those years required me to confront the fading struggle to sustain my autonomy. The growing, conflicted longing to be taken care of as I grew more vulnerable was something I disapproved of in myself and had fought against all my life. Both longings were embedded in my desire not to be a burden to those I love. Familiar? Now What? Notes from the Front Lines of Old Age is my third book about living while old. I'm closer to 90 now, and I'm happily settled into an independent, so far, life in Tucson that works for me. My understanding of life in the old and slow lane has deepened as I've made my way through this decade. Very little is what I've expected, but that's been true of the entire decade so far. I still awaken intending to seize the day, but the news, or my knee, or not having enough milk for that first critical cup of coffee can leave me without the focus required for sustained seizing. Being a writer, an activist, an old Jewish lesbian, a mother to 2 middle-aged daughters, and a part of a far-flung community of women all require my full attention. I'm at the end of things and need to extract all the juice I can out of every one of these days. A heads up. There is not one single bit of uplift and no suggestions about improvement discreetly nestled into these pages. I don't know how you should live or think or feel. I have no big life lessons to offer, nor any crone-like sagacity. I suspect you're just fine as you are. After all, you've been yourself for a long time. In these pages, I offer some of the reflections that remain after a life in which I invited the stories of women, wrote about them, and lived long enough to uncover and reveal my own stories that had been hiding in plain sight. This is some of who I am right now, a glimpse that I hope will lead you to recognize something of yourself as well. And maybe consider forming a circle with other old women to talk everything over.
So, as you've been writing these books, you have been extending yourself outwards, meeting a lot of people, hearing lots and lots of stories. And I know that you've been really thinking a lot about oldness and what other people are thinking about it and how it's making, how they're living it, basically. And so you've just said, and of course it's true, everybody has their own life, everybody is different. And we'll just assume everybody's okay the way they are. Still, what is it you have noticed? What are some of the themes, some of the, I don't know, trends in thinking about oldness, whatever?
Okay. So let me start categorically. I've been in Tucson for 3 years, and there are 3 worlds that I am currently inhabiting. The first one is very akin to Ashby Village, and it is the environment that caught me when I landed with a thud after I left Phoenix, pretty depleted emotionally. And it's called Senior Pride, and it's a grassroots organization that was formed in Tucson and south of Tucson for LGBTQ oldies. And as it's been about 15, 16 years now, and as it's developed, more and more activities, programs, generative things are being developed for Senior Pride, you know, much as Ashby Village expanded and deepened to meet the needs of its members. And it's a community building opportunity for people who would otherwise not have community. So I think in that way, it's probably not entirely akin to Ashby Village. And the people in Senior Pride and the activities, you know, range, they're becoming more political now, which makes me happy. There's a grief group for activists, which I love. I mean, that's a new program that just started. But there are lots of really good, comforting programs, and also the tech programs, which we oldies need, and all the kinds of things that allow us to come together and feel part of something that's bigger than ourselves. So that's one of the worlds in which I move. There's a book group that I'm part of. And so what I find with the LGBT people in Senior Pride is something not unlike what I found in Phoenix. These are people who are living in the present tense. There's not a whole lot of desire for anything other than filling this chapter of their lives as richly and as fully as they can. Most of them are in their 70s. So there's pickleball and et cetera. I've had personally a very, this is another tangent, but it was a very rich opportunity for me to reconnect with gay men with whom I've had not very much contact since I lived in San Francisco during the AIDS epidemic, where gay men were very central in my life, and I was a member of Shahar Zahav when it was just forming. The gay men that are members of Senior Pride are men who came out in very, very difficult circumstances. Lots and lots of them had fathers who were Marines, and I mean, some hard times, lost custody of their children. So I'm sort of revisiting a piece of our history as LGBT people in my relationship with these men, which enriches me and for which I'm very, very appreciative. So Senior Pride is one part of my life, and the second part of my life is that I'm doing interviews for the university archives of lesbian activists. So the woman who started the first bookstore in Tucson called Antigone, which is the first women's bookstore in America, started in Tucson. The women who were the visionaries and the women who created what was in those days gay and lesbian culture and environment and activities and possibilities. I'm interviewing them for the archival project that the university is doing. So I'm meeting women who created a future that would not have existed in Tucson without them, and making friendships that I wouldn't otherwise have had access to, which enriches my life. There's nothing like a visionary, to make friends with a visionary, so enriching my life enormously. And then the last world that composes my life right now in Tucson is that I'm teaching in a very, very well-resourced residential community, and I'm teaching a memoir class. They call it a memoir class. Secretly, I am infusing it with very, very many doses of consciousness raising, but I do it very quietly, so it's not apparent. And there are 15 in the class, and we've been meeting for a year and a half, and as far as they're concerned, we're going to meet forever and ever until everyone's dead, because we're all having such a wonderful time. And how do I want to say this? There's a way in which, when the invitation is made carefully and patiently to invite someone forward, everything that is caught in their throat wants to escape. It's just right there. They don't have to think. It's there. But it has to be the invitation, the safety of the invitation. And probably the best compliment that I got from one of the women, it's women and men in this group, but the best compliment I got from one of the women in the group was, we don't talk like this in the dining room. And the intimacy deepens, the subject matters deepen. It's like, and I've always known this politically. I learned it in my 80s personally. I know it deeply. Secrets are the things that make us the most lonely. And so, to the degree, not inviting people to go further than they can tolerate, of course, there's some skill involved, but I mean the idea of, we all so want to be known, want to have our lives witnessed. And so when I wrote in the introduction to sit with other women to talk all of this over, so when Nan said, what is it I see? What is it I notice? I notice old women holding on to so much that we could let go of. You used to be the place where the family gathered and you made the big meal. And you push to keep doing it because it's a part of your identity and it's a source of pride, and you don't have to. You don't have to work so hard to stand straight and not bend over, especially if you've got a kid around observing you. I mean, the examples just go on and on and on of the things, the foolishness that, I don't mean that dismissively, because I'll tell you, I will tell you one of my foolishnesses right this minute. My socks are too short. And I wish I didn't notice such a foolish thing, that there's a gap and there's some leg. Why do I care? Why do I notice? It's not easy giving up foolish things. But to the degree that we can, the little foolish things and the big foolish things. And also, I have had the blessing, which some of you have had, of having that. I've had a lot of consciousness raising experiences, most of which are a blur now, but not the first time. The first time I said something I had never said, and around the circle of these women I never heard of, I didn't know at all, and I was hoping one of them would be my friend and ask me for coffee afterwards. And I said whatever it was I said. I don't remember that part either. What I remember is a whole circle of women going, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And that has been true all my life. I have never had an experience where a woman in a circle said, "What?" That has never happened, ever. So for me, the political part of this period in my life and writing these books and talking about these books is the fantasy that all over Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco and Tucson and Phoenix, there are circles of women telling each other what it is to be them, witnessing one another's lives, the kids who didn't turn out the way you thought they were going to turn out, the partner that you're taking care of, whatever, the dreams that didn't work out, the dreams that unexpectedly did, whatever constituted the life, to find the words to have them witnessed, received, honored. That's the gift we can give each other, but only if we honor ourselves enough to take the time to create the circle in which we can do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. You have already spoken a lot directly and also indirectly about how you felt yourself changing as you aged and as you absorbed what it is to be a person who's old. What have you not told us yet?
That's not a, people who know me know that's not a good question to ask, but here's what I will tell you. Let's see. While I'm trying to find, I thought I had everything so carefully marked, but oh well, here we are. I don't remember, I think it was when we were in our 60s, those of you who are in your 80s, and there was a little flurry of books that came out, one of which was When I'm an Old Woman, I'll Wear Purple. And I thought, oh yeah, that's going to be great. When I'm an old woman, I will finally relax. And all of the behaviors that I don't let myself have, and all of the flowy purple clothes, and the long dramatic earrings, and the iris apfel glasses, and I'm going to do that when I'm old. Well, I'm still entirely myself. I don't wear purple. I'm way 1,000,000% looser than I was at 60, for sure, when so much mattered. But we don't change. we soften, we open, but we don't change. So you will never see me in purple with long earrings. I always wanted to be a woman who wore capes. I thought I would be so dramatic. But the thing about capes is your hands come out like this. There's nothing exactly to, it just never worked for me to, yeah. But I will read you a little section to answer Nan's actual question. Okay. So this is the chapter, or a piece of the chapter, from the book called, and you have to hear this with a Jewish accent, Enough Already. Okay. How old do I have to be before I can end my lifelong pursuit of trying to improve? Will I ever conquer or at least befriend my demons? Shouldn't there be a cutoff expiration date for all that anxious, energy-consuming labor? When can I let enough simply be enough? Can there be still more to unearth after I've reached the august age of 87 last year? I don't want to give up being my best self, which, as all the arbiters of well-being and self-affirming achievement agree, is a worthy goal. We all want to try to be our best selves, whoever she might turn out to be. I don't want to come to the end of my life having remained stuck like tires on a muddy road, going over the same ground again and again, asking the same questions and colliding with the same answers. I've been in psychotherapy twice, once after the death of my mother and again after a shattering breakup. My first therapist listened well, by which I mean she didn't interrupt me with curious questions, interject, say more, or take notes while I was talking. As a result, I could hear myself, with her guidance, unpacking and examining my history with my mother. She made some valuable connections, some associations I hadn't seen, but mostly left me to my own devices. The experience was a gratifying success. My second therapist was less formal and more engaged. She was my age, both of us then in our 70s, and had a tastefully decorated office, revealing the working environment of a well-read and well-traveled woman. Our work together was an active and engaged collaboration. She was innovative, agile, and patient enough to encourage me forward as I navigated the historic reasons for my ending a significant relationship. I'm very grateful to both of them. These immersions alerted me to the endlessly compelling specificity of the unique me and the unremarkable and inevitable nature of being a person. Loss, death, meaning, connection, that's the landscape we're all trying to navigate. Why was I who I was? How did I grow from the rocky soil that was my beginnings? What stories and behaviors did I create to protect myself against re-experiencing those injured places of my childhood? How have I experienced them in my adult choices? Have I papered them over or healed them just a little? How would I know? And on it goes, deeper and deeper into my suffering, my autobiography. It's a narrative where I play the lead and everyone else is somewhere between a co-star and a bit player. Oneself is an endlessly riveting subject matter until it isn't. My storage unit contains 3 banker's boxes filled with journals, letters, dreams, and odd, once meaningful objects. I think about the me who recorded her life as she lived it, searching for clues to who she was and why, and I want to put my arms around her. The young me, the middle-aged me, casting around for the key to unlock all these unfathomable mysteries that would finally free me. There are an endless number of threads to unravel. What about the me that had the advantages of whiteness, a middle-class upbringing, and good health? Balanced, of course, with the gender expectations of a girl growing up in the 1940s. The goal was marriage, ideally with a skill to fall back on just in case. The just in case part wasn't articulated, but it was preparation for one's husband losing his job or leaving or some catastrophe requiring the wife to provide for the family. I was to be a wife, but with marketable skills in reserve. The choices were either teacher or secretary, represented in those days by women who were then called spinsters, among whose ranks I am sure were a significant number of lesbians who never intended to marry at all, at least not to a man. Being able to marry a woman was then unimaginable. The path to what was considered successful adulthood was very narrow then. The intervening decades found me moving out of my adolescent and young adult period of wanting desperately to belong and fit in, to my later series of choices to become the best iteration of a bohemian outcast I could summon. By middle age, I was finally centered in a life as an activist, a lesbian feminist, a woman living in a world of women who, like me, wanted to create a world that did not yet exist. One where women were safe from violence and had access to health care, education, housing. We were each focused on different aspects of this world-changing project. I wrote, then taught, and then wrote some more, the role that best suited me. Yet my efforts to become a better version of myself resurfaced after the deaths of both my parents and my brother. I was now all that was left of our family. I yearned to acquit myself in their dead eyes by becoming the person they always hoped I'd be. Less judgmental about my brother's choices, kinder and more patient with my mother's striving, less stubborn, more open-minded, echoing my father's best qualities, patterns I've been unsuccessfully trying to modify all my life. They'd never get to see the upgraded me, but I would reach for her as a way to honor them. All these decades later, I'm not much less judgmental, but I notice when I am, and I bat the thoughts back, sturdily. I'm less stubborn and more curious because being right no longer has the same urgency it had when I was younger. Making mistakes, not understanding, being confused, and forgetting come with the territory in one's late 80s. I'm an ongoing work in progress. Have I peeled enough onions, explored my psyche deeply enough, read enough books, and had sufficient conversations to have fulfilled my efforts to improve? Is more emotional labor required? If so, what direction should that excavation focus on? I've concluded that I've developed as much as I'm going to. This is the best me I will ever achieve, and there will be no more unpacking and investigating. Beside my bed hangs a faded 3x5 card, carefully matted and framed, upon which my beloved wrote, "There is no greater gift than that of the new day." She wrote that as she was dying. I read that each morning as I am living, because as long as I'm alive, I will be fully alive. Every single minute of my life will be on purpose. Thank you. Now's the part I like the best, the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you, thank you. I mean, we could listen to you a lot longer, but it is time for questions. And so, do it. Oh, we're collecting.
That was a loud
them.
cough.
Oh, okay. Okay. There's a question?
mentioned about these three different kind of communities or activities in Tucson now. Can you talk about your spiritual life now?
Yeah, I'll repeat it. Karen wanted me to talk about my spiritual life now. I'm going to expand the question that you didn't ask, because we know each other for a long time, so I feel free to do that. There is my religious life and there is my spiritual life, and there are ways in which they overlap and ways in which they're discrete. There is something for me, let's see, let me get the words I want to say. There's something for me that roots me, I guess rooted is the word I want to say, about Judaism. I find the tradition beautiful, ancient, rich, complicated, requiring challenges, engagement. Let me not be quite so abstract. Let me maybe just tell you a story of how I came to the relationship I have with the practice, and I am a practicing Jew, the practice of Judaism. I was a Tikkun Olam Jew, I was a bagels and lox Jew, you know, like that, until my partner was dying. And as she was dying, we met with Rabbi Yoel Kahn, who at that point was just starting Shahar Zahav here in Berkeley. And she was planning her funeral, and she was wanting to study about Tahara and some of the practices and so forth. And that was sort of the first time I moved towards study, and I was really only doing it because I was accompanying her, and it was important to her. It didn't really enter me until after her death, and the extraordinary wisdom of 7 days of Shiva, where the person who is in mourning does nothing but be in mourning. That's all. And then there is the period for 30 days of Shloshim, where the person begins to engage with life, but is seen by the community as a person in mourning. And then the 11 months after which we are enjoined to re-enter life and hold the one who has passed within us to accompany us as we go forward. There was something for me, and I was only 50 years old when she died. There was something about the architecture of that just felt so perfect, about the whole architecture of mourning, that led me to a kind of curiosity about, well, if I know this little corner of things, there must be a whole lot more I would like to learn. And just to give you a little bit of a visual of that period of my life, which went on for about 10 years of study. This is when Nan began Chokhmat Halev, and this is when Karen and I sat next to each other as chavruta, which is a form of study in Jewish life where you have a study partner. Because in Jewish life, and part of what I love about Jewish life, through a feminist lens, let me hasten to add, through a feminist lens, is something that is pivotal to my life. There are no answers. There are better and better and better questions. And as we train our minds to find the richer and the more subtle and the more nuanced and the more complex questions, we're able to enter more deeply into the wisdom tradition. What this time also requires of me is to hold the aching disappointment for me of what the nation states of Israel has become, with my love of the tradition and the practice of Judaism. And holding those two things from one day to the next requires, I don't know what it requires. What I know is I wouldn't have been able to do it at 40. I would have had to land somewhere. I wouldn't have been able to hold the both in the way that I'm able to hold the both now. I don't know that I can explain it to you or even to myself. It's just the years of being able to, it was a great loss. I am from the generation, which perhaps some of you are, where we put quarters in the slots to plant trees, and the idea that this was a desert without people, for an empty land without people, for a people without land. But the arc of the loss has been a great and profound loss. And the love for Shabbat, for the holidays, for the music, for the wonderful, endless interpretations of every single weekly parsha, disabled interpretations, lesbian interpretations, feminist interpretations. It's so, we're free to go anywhere in this tradition and bring it to life and have it become part of the tradition. It feels, Judaism feels very alive to me, and expanding and rich. At the same time, there is the loss. That's what I would say.
So what you're saying is that you feel at this time in your life that you can hold the contradictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way that you weren't when you were younger.
That's absolutely, thank you. That's absolutely right. She's done this all my life. I go on at great length, and then she'll say a sentence, and I'll, exactly. And that's because certainty in my younger years provided comfort. I knew what I thought, I knew what I believed, I knew what was true, period. And the not knowing was destabilizing in the time of my life that I wanted to be seen as a woman who knew. I'll tell you another story about that. When Barbara was dying, we went to we were in New York, we went to Central Park, and Ram Dass was speaking about death. There must have been thousands of people in Central Park. And he finished talking, and somebody asked a question, and he stood there for quite a while, and then he said, "You know, I don't know." And I remember thinking, what? There's 2,000 people looking at him. He needs to say something. He needs to... And he didn't. And that was the very first... It didn't stick then, but it stayed. And I was able later to reference it, that you really can, when you have people looking at you, say, "I don't know." And then, of course, the best thing is if you're in a circle, you turn to someone and say, "What do you think?" And then the answer can start to come.
Okay. Two very different questions are sitting on my lap here. But I just want to say that you earlier were speaking about, and even now you were speaking about the importance of people connecting with each other, and our desire to be seen and understood, to be known at this time of growing older. And there are people who have no families, no children. You speak about your daughters. You speak about, Barbara, that's a long time ago, but still. And so what are do you have some thoughts about that? People who feel the loneliness of being alone, or maybe it isn't so lonely, maybe it's wonderfully expansive. But still, it's a different thing than, oh yes, groups and talk and all of that.
Okay. So there's a lot of different answers for that. But this immediate and specific answer is, in Ashby Village, you know who those women and men are, and it's your responsibility to make the effort to be sure they're included, they're picked up, they're dropped off, they get a casserole. That's part of the ethos of what Ashby Village is and what its responsibility is for each of you. So when you're living in a community, you know who the people are who are shy to ask, who pretend they're okay, but you can really see they're not okay, who really say they don't need help in the house, but when you go to visit, you can see they need help in the house. That's on us to step forward. That's our responsibility to one another. And then there's the structural organizing that has to happen, where there are services for people who need services, who don't have them, and access to services. And in this unimaginable America that we are all living in now, and with funds being cut, the kind of activism and lobbying to be sure that, to the degree we can, I don't mean to sound naive about this America, but to the degree we can, that services for people, we have a friend, who needs help taking a shower and wouldn't be able to manage a shower if somebody didn't help her. And so that's the community organizing part that I think we also have a responsibility to do. And then there is a world that is growing that I only know because of my youngest daughter, who at this point in her life doesn't have either children or a partner, and it's called solo aging. And because she lives on machinery in a way that I don't live on machinery, she has educated me to how big a world this is and how many resources there are, and the connections that people are making online and the resources that people are developing. So those to me would be, I guess, the answers that I could say. I mean, the most important one, I guess, because the other two, you know, how do I want to say this? When you live a feminist life, part of living a feminist life is paying attention to what's missing, paying attention to what's out there on the margins, paying attention to the women and the men who are not there that should be there, paying attention to the people who lost their license and now are spending too much time at home. That's our job, to be in community with one another, to be responsive to one another. So in the most immediate way, I would answer it like that, as well as for those of us who are activists. We have our work cut out for us in this America as activists, but there certainly are old age specific organizing and focuses that we could turn our attention to if we decided that we wanted to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you talking a little bit about what is our responsibility. Mm-hmm. Those of us who are in more supportive environments, mm-hmm. and how we can accompany other people who don't have what we have, mm-hmm. in that way, and how that brings forth new relationships, mm-hmm. how that fills the giver as well as the receiver. I like all of that so much.
I just want to say one more thing, mm-hmm. about that. It's my mother's finger here. So say one more thing. One of the interviews that I did for the archives, that they've all been really very generative and rich, and some really interesting women, but one of the women that I interviewed talked about feminism as something that was just exhilarating when she was younger, and had lots and lots of stories to tell about what a rich time it was, and all the demos and the marches and the meetings and when I continued my questioning, it was clear that that never became the lens through which she continued to move through her life. It was a time, and it is no longer a time. And so I think I just want to, and I want to give you a good dose of my earnestness, which is why when Nan said, "Oh, this is funny," I mean, it was a surprise to everybody that I had moved out of my earnest place. But this is what it means to call ourselves feminists. We're responsible to and for one another. That's part of what the job is, to call ourselves that. Yeah, okay.
So this brings us to our last question. And it was printed out for me like this here. I was raised in Phoenix, a very conservative environment. I counted the days before I left at age 18. How have you coped, Sandy, with the MAGA politics, the hatred of migrants, and the stupidity towards people who were not white or Christians after living in the Bay Area for so many decades?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that both of my daughters have been saying to me for decades when we have political conversations, "Mom," first of all, it sounds like this, "Mom," so you know it's going to be something critical. "You live in a bubble." And they were right. And when I got to Tucson, which is a border town, it has a very well-developed, very quiet infrastructure doing immigrant organizing, activism. White people go to a church, get bags of groceries, bring them to houses. A white person comes out of the house to get the bags of groceries. White people take their kids to school. This is not just since Trump. This is an infrastructure that has been going on quietly with the understanding, because, I mean, Tucson is blue, but just 20 minutes outside of Tucson, it's blood red. So it's always been the understanding we need to be quiet about this. We need to do what needs to be done quietly. No big statements, demos, any of that stuff. They just do what needs to be done. So I was able to plug into what already existed, to find my way to be of use. And so I can drive. I can't lift groceries. I mean, I can't do a lot of stuff, but I can drive groceries from one place to the next. So there's a world of people in Tucson who are doing what we used to call the work. They're doing the work. They're doing the stuff with the whistles and all of them, the cards and so forth. It's a very, very grim time for brown people in Tucson, for sure. But I don't feel in Tucson so far from home, so far from Berkeley. It doesn't feel different to me. That was not the case in Phoenix. In Phoenix, it was a tremendous sense of, well, mostly in Phoenix, it was shame more than anything else. It's like, what have I wrought? What am I doing here? But I feel very much politically at home in Tucson, and there is work for me to do, even though I have to do work while seated. But there's still plenty of work to be done while seated for all of us. Yeah.
Let's give them a hand. Okay, you'll see if I listened well. I'm allowed to tap 3 times. Okay, I'm Freiberg, Ashby Village's executive director. So thank you, Sandy, for really your sharing of your oldness, yes, and for your not so subtle raising our consciousness. Yes, indeed, I really feel that. So many lessons here, so many powerful lessons, and your honesty and your humor just like really make it sink in. And Nan, thank you so much for your beautifully skilled interviewing. Yes. And quick thanks to you, Irene, and your awesome team of volunteers for making today possible, for Epworth Church, for your sharing this space for us. And for those of you that don't know Ashby Village, there might be a few of you there, please come, join us as a volunteer or member. We are working together to transform how we age. We do it with community, with connection, with vibrancy and self-determination. Our programs are free of charge, so we can make it accessible to everyone. If you're able to give us a donation, there's a QR code as you leave. Pick up a brochure. There'll be an email with a link to donate that you'll get after this event. And that's about it. So thank you for coming.